I hope you can agree with me that addressing climate change now feels inevitable, not merely possible. Thanks to pioneering businesses, countries, and communities, the cost of renewable energy is declining. And a world without coal is now possible, where we've exited oil as well. China just committed to net zero emissions by 2060, which is a historic moment. California and Europe say that soon all vehicles will be either electric or running on alternative fuels. And nearly half of the countries in the world say that they want to see some form of carbon tax in trade agreements, shifting consumption away from high emissions. These solutions are urgently needed and well overdue, but are also expensive. So where does that leave the poorest region in the world? Can Sub-Saharan Africa develop in a low-carbon world? Africa is certainly not responsible for the emissions and global warming that we're seeing to date. The industrialized nations who have gone through emissions-intensive production process are driving the global warming to date. These are Europe and Russia, North America and Asia. Combined, emissions from these regions have already warmed our planet by 1 degree Celsius, with more warming built in because carbon lasts for 30 years. So Africa is not responsible for global warming, but is exposed to the impacts of it, with many people working as smallholder farmers. Depending on rain-fed agriculture, changing precipitations is a risk. And rising temperatures affects crop yield, and many cities and urban areas are exposed to the impacts of flooding and drought. So development in Africa is squeezed from two sides. The climate risk side, where lives and livelihoods are at stake, and the mitigation side, where the world is shifting consumption and production, potentially making it more difficult to develop. I moved to Lagos 3 years ago, where I work on climate action planning across 4 cities in West Africa. Lagos alone is home to over 20 million people, 60% of whom are living in informal settlements, and 1 out of every 2 kids are chronically malnourished. So what does it mean? Does it make sense to be working on long-term emissions and climate change in a context that needs urgent and basic needs to be met? Shouldn't the continent focus on development and worry about the climate later? And are the two a paradox? This is exactly our first development scenario. It's jobs for emissions or business as usual. So you can see here an environmental Kuznets curve, which shows the relationship between emissions and economic development based on the experience of all those regions. So starting with poor farming, which is also very low emissions, that's the primary economy. The secondary economy is industrialization, where manufacturing and factories open up. Steel production, automobile manufacturing, a lot of the production you see in Asia today. This phase is very resource and emissions intensive, but also very high economic growth, where people are employed en masse with relatively good wages and predictable income. So industrialization paves the way for the third economy, which is driven by services. Think of financial services, education, restaurants and dining, so things that drive the economy with wealth. So that allows for continued economic growth decoupled from emissions because it's much less resource intensive and kind of a peak in stuff. Let's follow this business as usual to 2050, where Africa's population is projected to double to 2.5 billion people. And let's say that emissions per capita grows from the current average on the continent of 1 ton per person per year, up to the average of the OECD countries, which are high income, or 10 tons per person per year. This could mean that in 2050, Africa is a high-emitting region, having emitted 450 billion tons of carbon, the same amount that North America and Asia are at today. But the IPCC, the Global Climate Science Authority, says that if we want a 50-50 chance of staying within 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, we have a carbon budget remaining of just 270 billion tons of carbon. So a business as usual development scenario for Africa would push us well beyond the 1.5 degree Celsius target. The second scenario is clean industrialization, which asks, can we industrialize without that rise in emissions? This scenario requires massive amounts of clean energy to power industry, and it would allow that traditional economic development process decoupled from emissions. Rwanda actually aims to do just this. In the development plan, the country aims to create 1.5 million jobs in light manufacturing, textiles, leather, electronics. And the 2020 climate plan, released earlier this year, aims to construct 150 megawatts of hydropower to power this industry, displacing greenhouse gas emissions and allowing for economic growth without that cost to the climate. The third and final scenario says, what if there's an entirely new development path altogether, which is leapfrogging from the agricultural primary economy to the third tertiary economy driven by services, bypassing the industrialization process altogether. In fact, scholars have found that across Africa, since independence, when many of the leaders were investing in manufacturing, the share of jobs in manufacturing has been declining with an increase in services jobs. And they're calling this premature deindustrialization, which shows that there's this shift to the tertiary economy underway. And Rwanda also aims to capitalize on technology trends to drive a services economy. So the development plan aims to have universal youth digital literacy within the next 5 years. The Mara Group has also released the first smartphone, 100% made in Africa. And Rwanda aims to create value added in manufacturing for farmers, increasing their income, and banking farmers to take part in a consumer services economy. In conclusion, Africa is hailed as the next big growth opportunity. But as we've seen, climate change is squeezing development prospects from two sides. From the climate risk, where people and their livelihoods are exposed to climate impacts, and from the mitigation side, where the world is moving to a net zero world, changing consumption and production patterns. The first scenario that we looked at is a business as usual, and it says, develop first and think about climate later. So the two are a paradox under this scenario. The risk here is that in 2050, Africa could be a major emitter in a world that's net zero emissions. And the second risk is that this will push us well beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, which is the goal of the Paris Agreement. So it's important to have a defensive strategy against scenario 1. The best solutions fall under scenarios 2 and 3, clean industrialization and leapfrogging to services, which treat development and climate in an integrated joint goal. And as we saw with Rwanda, the country is targeting an elements of both. So clean industrialization by powering light manufacturing with hydropower, which is clean, and leapfrogging to a services economy. But just to be clear, these are uncharted territories, and Africa will be pioneering what clean development looks like, because all the other regions have gone through high emissions scenarios. So if you run a business, think about how can you reduce your emissions and take advantage of the growing clean economy. Maybe that's clean energy or efficient production or less packaging. And if you work in environmental projects, how can you support job creation and economic development? If you need a personal reason to think about this stuff, well, research has shown that people that take the time to consider paradoxical statements end up being better problem solvers. In this case, the paradox is Africa must develop, and Africa must have a safe climate in which to develop. And we need the best problem solvers, like you, to solve the climate and development paradox. Thank you.